Welcome into another episode of Making the Leap. We're so glad to have you with us. We always enjoy when we get to these places in our conversations that on occasion we'll be able to kind of repeat, bring someone back. Not because we're running out of ideas. I feel like my inbox is overflowing with ideas, but because they just have so much to offer to the conversation. And we are glad today to welcome back Ian Pryor. He is with America First Legal. He is an author of a book called Parents of the World Unite. He is the founder of Fight for Schools. Ian, we're so glad to have you back with us. I know it's been a couple of years. I had to dig way back in the archives to go and find it, but thank you for taking your time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What did we talk about last time?
Same thing as always.
That's
Same,
right.
like stir and repeat. The schools, the parents, kind of the crazy, I think, is where we're at.
People should remember about Ian, if they don't, is that we met you. I personally met you for the first time in, I think what was or still is your home county of Lowden County, which was sort of the epicenter of the school choice movement. That was pre-Glenn Youngkin and all of that stuff. You were really at the forefront, and of course you wrote the book, as Christine just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm still in Lowden County. I mean, it still burns here. We have a new school board. The last school board that really where all this kind of came about. They all either just quit or they got beat. But unfortunately, they're replaced with more of the same, more of the same kind of people that, really don't look out for the interests of their constituency as a whole, but look out for, a small group of people that are driving the conversation. And one of the big problems that I've seen, not just here in Loudoun County, but schools everywhere is the bad legal advice that they get from their attorneys. We see it everywhere, even school board members that you think, well, this person's on our side, but then they say, well, the lawyers told us this. And that's a real problem that I think we're seeing across the country.
I would 100% agree with that. Last year I had, like you said, rinse and repeat, right? Same problems, different board, different members. Last year I was reaching out to some school board members here in our area, like neck of the woods, Kansas City area. And the ones that I knew were kind of that on my side type thing, same thing, conversation. Well, the lawyer said this, the lawyer said this, the lawyer said this. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, look what is happening to our kids here. And it was just a really good lesson to me to continue to fight, to continue to pay attention, to continue to look to see what is happening when school board members themselves are kind of, just going off the deep end on things.
I'm interested in that because, your work with America First Legal, you're a practicing attorney as well. Coach Joe Kennedy is one of the most famous examples of this. We talked to him not too long ago, and he said it wasn't his school board that was hassling him about praying. Right. It was the lawyers advising the school board that ultimately caused the consternation. And I guess I'll ask you broadly, when you're a citizen elected to your school board, are you obligated to defer to your school district's attorneys?
No. And look, I think when you're talking about school attorneys, I worked for a municipality, not in sort of the school area, but more the law enforcement area. But I think what you see is that people that are school board lawyers or school division lawyers, they're used to discussing things and researching things like IEPs, special education, sort of the bread and butter regulatory issues that involve schools. What we're seeing now, though, is far more constitutional. We're seeing things that have never been dealt with before because, quite frankly, nobody ever thought that, putting boys in girls' bathrooms at, second grade was a good idea. So we're in this new ground of constitutional law. And the attorneys, they're just not constitutional lawyers. So, they'll say, well, Title IX says that there's a right to this. No, Title IX doesn't say that. The Title IX doesn't say that at all. Maybe Joe Biden's guidance says that, but that's just the guidance. Or, in here where we are in Virginia, we're in the Fourth Circuit, and it says, well, the Grimm case, Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, says there's an equal protection right for a student to use the bathroom of the sex they identify with. Okay, well, that applies to one school, number one. But number two, it doesn't talk about Virginia Constitution, which is a very different constitution than the United States Constitution. And quite frankly, on this issue, I think conflicts with it, even if you're to give Grimm the benefit of being right, which we definitely do not. And the fact is you've got other jurisdictions, other federal courts that say the exact opposite of this Fourth Circuit case. So, a smart lawyer would say, look, we're going to face litigation one way or the other. Let's make sure that we take the position that one, represents our constituents, and two, is most likely the legal decision based on all factors, not just, one case. Another place where we see this is a far more simple area of law, which is when you go and give public comment at school board meetings. When you have these school boards that are shutting down school board meetings and saying you can't come in, well, that's a constitutional violation if it's motivated by viewpoint. Similarly, if you have a school board that allows you for public comment, which is usually not required by open meetings laws in states, but once they open their meeting for public comment, if they turn that off or take that away or manipulate it in any way based on viewpoint, well, then they violated the First Amendment. And we're seeing that over and over again. And it boggles the mind how any attorney can look at the state of the law and say, we're not going to get sued on this. I mean, it's crazy.
Are you under obligation as a school board member? If I'm an elected citizen of my school board, am I under legal obligation to defer to a school district attorney? I'm genuinely wondering. I can imagine it's very intoxicating once you get into these meetings and you're maybe kind of green and you don't really know about school policy and how things are done. You got a superintendent that's been knocking around for years and years and years. I imagine it's pretty intimidating, frankly, and you might tend to want to defer to the scholars and the legal people, right?
Well, that's always the case, right? Somebody's a lawyer or a paralegal or a doctor or whatever. We always defer. We say, well, they went to school for it. They're really smart. That person passed the bar. Okay, lots of people pass the bar. It's not particularly hard. Okay, there's lots of lawyers out there that aren't very good at their job. That doesn't. So we shouldn't just say, well, because this person went to law school, because they passed the bar, whenever it was, they must know exactly what they're talking about. No, the obligation is to adhere to clearly established law if you are a government actor. And clearly established law, is not always something that is as clearly established as a lawyer might want his client or a school board to believe. A ruling from one court that rules on one particular situation might be very different than a different situation with different facts and circumstances in a totally different state or in a different locality. So, there really is no clearly established law in these particular cases that a school board member or a government official can say, I have to do this or else I'm going to get sued and I'm going to be personally on the hook for this. It's just, they're looking at what their lawyers say. Their lawyers are telling them, you need to do this or we'll get sued. But in reality, if they went and got a second, third opinion, I think they'd find out that, this legal advice is not adequate.
Are you seeing, so I noticed a few days ago you had retweeted, or Twitter, X, whatever, you had posted something about the communications director for Loudoun County Public Schools just refusing to allow comments, to allow anybody to see her post that she was wanting to put up, that you had to apply, like you had to go ahead and submit your own profile to be allowed to view what she wanted to post. And I thought that's kind of in that same vein of when we're kind of infringing on speech, but at the same time, then she's protecting herself so much that the school board, the people that are in that school district can't see. Are you seeing a lot of that, or is that, I had not seen that before. That was
Certainly,
the first that I saw.
Mean, in our school district, I remember the former superintendent, as soon as things got hot, shut down his Twitter, or, other individuals have limited access to their Twitter. Now, to be clear, if you do not open up your social media channel as a government official for public comment, right? I mean, you can do that. You can say, I'm not going to allow people to comment at all on my social media channel. Once you do open it up, though, you can't, selectively block people.
Which is what she was in effect doing.
Comments that you don't like. So is it unconstitutional? Probably not. Does it look bad? Absolutely.
Hey, Ian,
For sure.
In the last couple of years since the upheaval in Loudoun County, since the election of Glenn Youngkin, some turnover on school board elections, someone asked me recently just kind of about the state of this movement in general and if it's ebbing, if in fact those that many parents rose up to fight are now reasserting themselves and coming back with a vengeance. What's the state of things in Loudoun County? Are the parents still winning the day, or have these forces that they were rising up against reasserting themselves? Is that what you're finding?
Well, I definitely think these forces are reasserting themselves, but I don't think it's ebbed. I think what ebbs is how it's covered nationally. And in 2021, if you think back in 2021, really there's one election that people are focused on. It's the first election after a presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
It's a purplish state, and it was the competitive governor's race to watch, not just for people in Virginia, but for others trying to see, what's the brake pedal that's going to be put on the country? Is this a symbol of where we're going after the Biden election? Now, once we move into 22, 23, 24, we're seeing a lot of different topics that are major national news, whether it's immigration, whether it's a presidential election, that have sort of, I don't want to say made this push less potent and less active. It just sort of pushes it down the news pages a little bit. But the parents that have been involved in this from the beginning, it was never about going out and getting news. It was about getting change, and a lot of times you change up your tactics. And so instead of 21, 22, where you're pushing this through media and you're informing people, what we're seeing now is a lot more litigation, a lot more challenges to these school boards, these school districts based on these laws, these very laws that we're talking about. I know for America First Legal, we've got a case in Fairfax County where we're challenging their policy saying, a student has to refer to another student by their preferred pronoun, and a student gets to use whatever bathroom they want. And if, the girl has a problem with it, she can go use a private bathroom. Right. So these are the kind of things that are happening, not just with us, but with other organizations across the country where, let's take these issues to court. Because, and not to, carry on, but pre-2020, the litigation was really coming from the other side to change the status quo. And as a result of that, we got something that this hodgepodge of regulations that, not only make no sense as a matter of common sense, but legally are completely flawed. And a lot of these decisions weren't challenged or weren't reviewed by a higher court. And so now you're starting to see an influx of lawsuits that ultimately are going to make their way up to the Supreme Court.
I think I can only imagine that was got to help some teachers breathe easier should it go the direction I think that we kind of all think it should, in terms of, are you required to use a pronoun that's different from what you would expect to use? We just spoke with a teacher a few weeks ago who basically said he was able to kind of dodge some of that through having, just some of that seniority, having tenure. He didn't have to push as hard, but yet when you're a new teacher coming into a system and you're told you legally have to do this and it goes against what you know to be right and what you know are your beliefs, I think cases like that are huge for teachers specifically to be paying attention to, because I think you're right. They're gonna go further. They're not just gonna stop at a state level.
To that end, Ian, have you seen people peel back in administration in school boards? I mean, the famous scenes we saw of dads literally being dragged out of school board meetings there in Lowden County. I mean, it was really contentious there, to say the least. Have you seen administrative pullback? Or are they still as aggressive and progressive?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're still as aggressive. Yeah, in Loudoun County, they just made a rule that so basically what happened, I think it was maybe February, started this policy is coming up for review based on what Governor Youngkin wants schools to do with his model policy. So this whole transgender bathroom pronoun policy has now come back up for review. And you had a bunch of new people show up to the school board meeting, and they were primarily Muslim parents. And these are people that they really weren't there. I don't remember seeing them in 21 and 22, but now they've come to these school board meetings, and they were speaking one after the other. And then what did the Loudoun County School Board do? They voted to completely turn the cameras off speakers and instead put the logo of the school on the broadcast that goes out through their private network that can be viewed by the public while you're speaking. So imagine that you've got a logo speaking to you. I mean, that is Orwellian.
That's exactly. I thought that's in some novels that I read.
And that's done because they don't want you to see the people, to hear the people. They're trying to hide that from you. Is that our interpretation of that?
Exactly. I mean, I think that, if, they'll say, well, you can still speak, right? So that'll be their argument. Well, you can still speak, so we're not violating your right to speak. But speech is more than just speech. It's also expression, right? So if I wanted to go to a school board meeting and just stand there in silence and convey my frustration that way, well, it's not being conveyed to the public, right? So my expression is being limited. If I wanted to go with placards that just say words and speak my words, or perhaps I have to use sign language, right? It's not being conveyed, or the expression with my hands or anything like that is all part of the constitutional right of expression, and they're infringing upon that.
Absolutely.
Ian Pryor is the author of a book we just mentioned called Parents of the World Unite. Can you talk a little about that book? I know we did when it first was released. It's been out for a bit now. Talk about what went into that book and your impetus for writing it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of different reasons for writing it. I think that it was just an insane time where so many people just came together to really try and make change. And then, I mean, this is everyday moms and dads. Yes, some of them, like me, had worked, at the Department of Justice or on political campaigns, but others hadn't. And we all just came together and really launched this campaign. And the campaign was to try and remove school board members, but it really became bigger than that. It became a public awareness campaign of what was happening at our school system, and by extension, schools across the country. And then because it was during the time of this gubernatorial election, because other things were uncovered that we had basically been predicting during that summer of 2021, it just became a life unto its own. And I think that movement really was the impetus for the election in 2021, which saw Glenn Youngkin, Jason Yaras, and Winsome Sears elected. The other thing too is you see all the pushback from the other side, and they would just say, well, this is funded by dark money, and this is all this crazy stuff. You're like, no, this is literally just resourceful people getting together and figuring out how to do the very things that you all are just trying to do by bashing your neighbors online or attacking people personally, whereas the focus of these parents was to, petition the government for a redress of their grievances. And we did it effectively, and we did it, and we had a loudspeaker where we were able to communicate that message. And hopefully, and I believe it did, from hearing from a lot of parents across the country, it inspired them to act in their own school districts.
So, Ian, the state of public education today, in your view, is what? Now 3 years out from having written that book and this kind of initial explosion, the state of it today is what? Either there in your backyard or maybe nationally. A lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Are you feeling positive? As I asked earlier, is it ebbing? I know you kind of answered that, but I mean, where do you see it?
Well, I've always thought that this is the kind of thing that is going to take a sustained effort. I mean, it took years and decades for the state of education to be what it is now through governmental interference at the federal level, special interest influence. I think what you're seeing now is not so much that the school districts are pulling back what they're doing. They're just not as vocal about it because they know that this is not going to go over well with the community. So that's what they do is they try and limit access, right? They try and do it behind closed doors, not give the public the same level of access, the same opportunity to go speak to a larger audience about what's going on. It's really going to take, I think, a sustained effort, at the national level too. I mean, if you think about Title IX, which is where all this stuff really comes into, if we're talking about bathroom usage and whatnot, or Title VI, if we're talking about their DEI programs and whatnot, it's going to take a concerted effort from the Department of Justice to enforce those laws. And certainly, we don't have a Department of Justice right now that's going to enforce those laws. But I think going forward, the hope would be, when there is an administration that's more focused on enforcing federal civil rights laws, they do it.
Can you talk a little bit about Fight for Schools, just kind of in that vein of what you were just saying? Can you talk a little bit about what that organization is, what its purpose, where you see it going?
Yeah, that's a good question as far as where we see it going. We're working through that now. I mean, its primary purpose really existed in 2021 as this vehicle to remove these 6 school board members who were part of a private viewpoint limited Facebook group that was targeting parents and suggesting all kinds of nefarious things merely because they were speaking out at school board meetings, either because they wanted schools reopened or they were frustrated with the DEI CRT curriculum that was being used in the schools. That turned into something completely different. And then into 2022, as those removals sort of wound down, one school board member resigned, two others, we weren't successful in the court, but we really turned into kind of an investigative arm as to all the things that we had uncovered with the previous administration, the previous superintendent, as that school system was under criminal investigation from the Virginia Attorney General's office. And so then as we move into 2023, certainly we were trying to help out with school board elections and our Commonwealth attorney, which, while not directly related to schools, we had a Soros-backed Commonwealth attorney who had their back every step of the way. And, she had $1 million budget running for reelection, and she lost to, I think he's 77-year-old guy that had maybe $60,000 in the bank, and she lost by 400 votes. And I think the work that we did, really shining a light on her activities and her as they related to the schools, really gave him that opportunity to mount a very successful campaign. So how it goes going forward, I think we're still trying to get our sea legs with this new board and see exactly what happens. But, we're certainly going to continue to hold the school system accountable.
I think that's really an interesting concept for people across the country where, I don't know that where we are right now, it didn't feel hotly contested this year. I think it has been in the past. This year it didn't. But I think for areas that do have these kinds of school board situations, and there are many, I think it's just really, you kind of have that model that I think is important for people to follow, to utilize, because I think the money generally is the big issue for a lot of people running. And just to combat 1 million with 60,000 is a lot. Like, that's just a lot for a local school board. But to be able to combat that, that's huge. I'm glad that you're able to do that.
What's been eye-opening, Ian, is to see this. And I would guess any community in which you live where there's anyone that's been serving on a school board for any length of time, small or large, it is amazing the organization and the money behind tenured school board members, particularly those that don't necessarily share our values. Don't kid yourself. Even at a local school board level, there is heavy political organization to keep certain interests entrenched, is there not?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. And one of the things is that, every action is met with an equal and opposite reaction. And if you go back in for example, Loudoun County in 2019, you had, I'd say the most well-funded school board candidate may have had, $28,000. Well, then we show up to town, we start pushing back. We raise $500,000 in a year. And by the time the 2023 elections come around, a lot of these, far left school board members had a significant amount of money. 28,000 would have been the bare minimum for a lot of these people. Most of them were, 50,000, 75,000, et cetera.
And why? So could I interrupt you and ask what on earth would justify that kind of money?
And what do they
get for it? Why?
They need to put out their message and counteract, I think, what the community has been seeing for years. So really, they need to go out there and be disingenuous about what they're going to do, and they are, right? I mean, every school board candidate will say, we need more school buses, or we need to do this better. And yeah, of course, everyone's going to agree with that. And part of the problem we had from an election perspective is that all the people whose name ID was probably pretty high and most people had negative impressions of, they didn't run. And so you've got a whole new bunch of people coming out there saying, yeah, I'm going to be great. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. When we all know, you're going to get in there and you're going to do the same thing as the last crew. The ones that ran for re-election that actually had a record, they were beaten, which should tell you something. And I think that people need to be a little bit more discerning when they pick these local officials. They need to do more than just say, well, this person's in office and I don't have any problems. They need to really research the issues and determine, is this person telling me what they're really going to do, or are they, waving the shiny hood ornament over here, and so they can go back in and do the same things that the last school board did, which, are not what the community supports.
Hey, Ian, are you much into the discussion on school choice? Christine and I talk a lot about Christian education specifically. I know your fight has primarily been in the public school arena. Where are you, or maybe for America First Legal, or do you have an opinion or a thought about the school choice movement broadly? There are about a dozen states out there with universal school choice right now. Has that been much in your purview, or are you kind of focused on public school reformation?
Well, I mean, personally, I think professionally, obviously with America First Legal, it's really litigation against these school districts for what they're doing as, government entities. So I can speak personally, but, I'm strongly in favor of that for many reasons. I think that it encourages competition. And one of the things that I think is most important about it is for all the people out there that, they make this push about equity, and they say, equity, equity, equity. You shouldn't be limited by your zip code, right? And for that, they implement all these DEI proposals. Well, I agree, you shouldn't be limited by your zip code. And if you're in an area that has poorly performing schools, you should be able to take your money and go to somewhere that has a better school. You should have that choice. And that's going to help everybody. And it's especially going to help the people that live in areas that have to go to schools that are underperforming. And, I think that's a message that Winsome Sears talks about it a lot. And I agree. I think that, it is fundamental to, our ability to educate our children and for them to have, bright futures, that they get the best education that can be provided for them. And if we are paying our money as taxpayers for that education, we should have more of a say in that education than simply, electing 9 or 10 or however many school board members who then proceed to ignore you for the next 4 years.
Couldn't say it better myself. Ian, the future of education generally is what? One that is more decentralized in your view? Will public school always be I'm asked this all the time. What is the goal ultimately? Correct. Is it that there is just universal school choice for all and that you can homeschool, you can send them to Christian education, or you can send them to the public school? Would that be your ideal? Is that Glenn Youngkin's ideal in Virginia? I'm not really sure where that stands today. I know the legislature is diametrically opposed to his work there now, but where do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be an all of the above solution. I mean, certainly, public schools have a place, private schools have a place, Christian schools have a place, but even within there, I mean, if you think about where we are, we're in the 21st century. There's so many more opportunities available to students as they get into the workforce than were available in the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s. The advent of technology provides so many more career opportunities. And if you just have a public school that's, focused on your general curriculum that doesn't necessarily match the interests of your child, what if one of your children is, really good at one specific skill and they're really committed to that, and you say, look, my child's not going to be a calculus ace, but they're really good at this. I want to find a school that focuses on this talent because I think that is going to serve him or her best, right? So it's not simply just we should be able to take our money and go wherever we want, but we need more diversified educational facilities that meet the needs of the skills, talents, and goals of students, which in some cases may be very unique and may require for them to succeed in that a more specialized education.
This is a philosophical question I like to ask people like you because there is no right answer. It's just one that I like to hear people like you answer. People that go into public education today in 2024, people that decide I'm going to go into college and I'm going to study to become a public school teacher, who are they? What kind of person are they today, given all that we know and all that we've been through now in the last few years?
I think they are people that want to use their position as educators to create social change through their work by educating those children in a specific viewpoint that matches their view of what social change should be.
I agree, yes, for what it's worth. Right. Not that I'm asking for affirmation, but I tend to agree. Gone are the altruistic days where Christine went in to teach kids just.
And to be fair, though, I had a viewpoint. I social justice wasn't the term of the day, but there were definite.
You weren't entering teaching though to impose a school.
No. But I actually could see where it was going back in the then, just thinking like, well, I'm going to have to get in line or I'm going to have to get out.
No, it's mission work, isn't it, Ian? I mean, ultimately now public education has become mission work for political figures, is what it's been.
Well, I go back to my high school days, and I remember, one of my teachers. And I mean, he was the best teacher I ever had because there was never a right answer. He taught history, right? So there was never a right answer. And his philosophy was basically question everything. So, we talked about whether it's the Cold War, whether it's, the Revolutionary War, we questioned everything. Now, certainly we were at an age where it made sense. If you're a junior and senior in high school, you start thinking, those fairy tales I was told when I was 7 or 8, I can get into those a little deeper. right? Not everybody, including our own government, always operates with altruistic means.
Right.
And I think that is the proper way to teach, is what you're guiding students to come up with their own conclusions. And you're not giving them those conclusions. You're just saying, don't conclude so easily. Here's why, whichever side of the equation the student is pushing. And, that went through college and law school, to be honest. And you just don't see that so much anymore, where, you're really challenging students to come up with their own ideas and their own thoughts and their own analysis, as opposed to, no, you must have this point of view.
Ian, as we wrap up, just curious, for people that are maybe on a school board or who teach, or you're a parent and you're at a school board meeting, for people that feel like, hey, there's something wrong here. I don't like it. I don't like the way this meeting's being run. Or I think you, like us, would say, civility is key. Never break the law. Don't go bananas about it. But people sometimes are afraid to do more. They just go home and they grumble, or they get on Facebook. What do you counsel parents to do when they feel really unsettled about, or a teacher, or a school board member that feels unsettled about what they're seeing? What should they do?
Well, I agree. I think that it is a tough thing to do, because once you put yourself out there, the powers that support everything you're against will come after you with a vengeance. So I would say that the most important advice I could give is number one, always think ahead and plan for that. Plan for it. Just don't go out and say something at a school board meeting and, next thing you know, you're being attacked left and right. Like, think 4 steps ahead. What's going to happen if I do this? How do I respond? What do I do next? So if you're going to go challenge your local, government organization, it cannot be willy-nilly, I'm just going to show up and say some, impressive things. You need to have a game plan. And you need to start with the end and then work your way there. And that can be intimidating, and it can get people to say, why bother? But ultimately, you're here for a reason. And if you're not out there to make sure that, your kids and the future generation of America is preserving our system of, checks and balances, liberties, freedoms, then, you're part of the problem.
And does that involve legal counsel as well, Ian? I mean, if somebody, maybe you feel like, gosh, maybe I should get a lawyer involved here. When I know every circumstance is different, but when might that be appropriate? Or could you say?
Well, I think, for example, if you're a teacher and you want to say something, or you want to stand up for your rights, you might want to talk to a lawyer before doing that, right? Because better to plan ahead than to say something that, while perfectly appropriate, gets you suspended, for unconstitutional reasons. Like, you want to have those things, or you're a parent, right? I mean, if you're seeing something that, hey, my child's rights are being violated, or my parental rights are being violated, you're going to want to talk to an attorney. You're going to want to see what the possibilities are. And, you may not always have a lawsuit, and it may not always make sense given the situation or the location or the individual facts and circumstances. But it's always good, and that's what America First Legal does. I mean, we are a nonprofit organization, so we talk to parents all the time about different things, and some of these cases, we bring to court.
Ian, I really want to thank you for your time today. I know we've covered a whole multitude of topics. I appreciate what you're doing for parents, as a parent who was not sure what I was doing when I stepped in front of a school board, who still think about stepping in front of a school board on occasion. I think what you're doing is invaluable, and I know teachers appreciate it as well, because we talk to a lot of them that feel very silenced. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and we look forward to continuing conversations later.
Thanks, Ian.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for this week's edition of Making the Leap. If you enjoyed what you heard, I hope that you'll give it 5-star review, and maybe a written review. That helps us a lot. And share it. Let other people know about this episode and all the others that we've done, 100-some that we've done now.
No, right?
And we will see you next time right here on Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. Please like and subscribe to the show and turn on notifications so that you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.